You are now watching Zach Lesage, the best place to learn about competitive Pokemon TCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin' peeps? Welcome back to the channel, Zach Lesage here. Today we are going to be covering over the top 10 best decks. If you want to know the best place to check out these decks, every single week here, 12 p.m. Eastern, that's going to be the top 10 best decks on the Zach Lesage channel. If you like this type of content, by all means give it a thumbs up, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. We are so close to 10k subs, about 500 peeps away. Let's make it happen. Tell your mom, grandmother, brother, sister, new person at League, anyone, let's get it. All the lists are going to be available in the pinned comments along with reference videos for most decks. Also, if you want to know the decks that placed 11 through 20, I do those videos every single Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. So check that out. That being said, let's absolutely jump into our number 10 spot. If you want to put your guesses in the comments below, that'd be absolutely amazing. I will get back to every single person's comment. Might be a day, might be two, but I will get back there. Let's jump into number 10. Swinging into number 10, and from number 14 moving up a little bit is Rapid Strike Urshifu Galarian Moltres V. Now, I'm going to tell you that this is one of those ones that I wasn't expecting to see. I know that a lot of peeps on here have been like, Zach, you don't really like Rapid Strike, and it's not that I don't like Rapid Strike, I don't particularly like this build. I feel like there's better fighting and dark decks available all throughout the entire top 10, because those are two very important types. In some ways, this is going to work out, right? Like, it's your fighting type, your dark type, but you're also using a third kind of like Inteleon. Like, it's one of those things where, like, I know Inteleon is a way to search out things with Drizzile or Shady Dealings with Inteleon, and Quick Shooting has some kind of synergy with Rapid Strike Urshifu to get those numbers with VMAX Rapid Flow, but largely I feel like this deck just doesn't gel well together. I don't know how to put it. Like, it's like oil and water in a lot of ways. There's not really like a set strategy when it comes to this deck. You're part Rapid Strike Urshifu with the kind of the spread element. You got Moltres to kind of accelerate those energies in some ways, so there's that synergy. But mainly Moltres just functions as an attacker, so if you're playing against a Mew deck, you're literally just playing a Moltres deck and discarding the rest of your deck for the most part. So not a big fan. If you're looking for a fighting and dark deck, I would honestly recommend the Galarian Surf Edge V deck. I like that deck a lot more with Galarian Surf Edge V and Baby Galarian Moltres. I like Gengar VMAX. Gengar VMAX has a Single Strike Urshifu V, and Gengar VMAX can knock out a lot of stuff. Single Strike as well. So you got Single Strike Urshifu and you got Umbreon. I just think that those are better decks. Going forward, I see this deck ducking back down into the top 20. But let me know what your thoughts are on this one. I think that it's one of those ones where it's often controversial. People that like this deck. People that do not, do not. Unfortunately, I'm one of the ones who do not. I respect all decks, but this deck is just not necessarily my vibe. But it is nice to see Rapid Strike Urshifu into the top 10. I think I called that out last week, how I said that Gengar is moving on up. That makes another Fighting Week Pokemon go up. Of course, Rapid Strike is going to follow. If I didn't say that, let me know. I'm sure someone definitely knows everything that I say. It's been a week, so I'll let y'all get to that in the comments. That being said, let's jump into number 9. Rapid striking it up all the way to number 9, and previously number 11, we got Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX with Melanie. So this is my preferred way of playing this deck. I think this is a better way to play it than the Galarian Moltres build, because it plays out like a Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX deck should, and you have some thematic text with the Metacham, and Melanie allows you to accelerate. I mean, I'd put it like this, if towards kind of the person that came up with this concept. Now, if it wasn't for Tord building this deck, like, do you think Tord would be playing this build, or do you think they'd be playing the Galarian Moltres build? Now, that's not to say that a player can't switch things up or anything else like that, but if the other one was so noticeably good, and just, I don't think people would be thinking outside of the box. I think it's always good to be creative and all that stuff, but this is just a purest form of the deck. If we look at, like, even when Gengar was seeing success, and I don't want to, like, always make it about Gengar, but it's something that I know a lot about. When we saw Gengar Umbreon decks, those decks were okay. We brought it to a purist standpoint of just Gengar. Gengar saw more success. In my mind, the more simplified and less complex a deck is, in most cases, it will be more successful. Think about streamlining anything. They always, like, when they make the new iPhone every single year, they're always trying to find something that they can fix with it. Maybe making it a little bit smaller, a little bit tweaks here and there. They're not making it, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's one of those things where Rapid Strike Urshifu, very strong card. Adding other things just takes away from that, and sometimes more is less. And I think this is really the case of that. Again, it's probably another hot take, or there's going to be some peeps that don't necessarily like it, but it is one of those things where I think that this deck will see slightly more success than the other build, because the other build will clunk up a little bit more. This deck's probably going to set up a little bit more. That being said, I think that this deck's probably, it might just stay in the top 10 at this point for the rest of our Fusion Strike metagame. We're only a couple weeks out from Brilliant Stars being released, so we'll have to see how that plays into anything else. I don't necessarily know how Rapid Strike is going to deal with the new Manaphy coming out in Brilliant Stars, but I think that this deck is appropriate enough in the metagame. Now, I do want to put a little bit of a star towards any deck that's in the lower half of our top 10. I think that with the new Leafeon V-Star, Glaceon V-Star, few other decks that people are experimenting with, anything could really happen, and I think boredom can spark creativity in the format. So I do want to put like an asterisk besides any of the decks in the kind of lower top 10 that anything could happen. I think we've already saw it where Surfetch V popped up for a little bit, or even the Leafeon V-Star decks were popping up at late night. It's one of those things where I think players are just going to play what they want to play. Skyscrapering over the rest of the competition, or at least most of it, at number 8 is Duraludon VMAX. Now, this deck fell all the way from number 6, and that's completely fine. It's one of those things where I've said it a few times where I just don't think Duraludon is as well equipped for this current metagame as it was before. You can see that it has the 200 CP, so it's still doing okay. I know a lot of people ask me about how the CP is ranked, and I do like to try to mention that per video. CP is ranked based on all the events that are played on the Play Limitless platform. I rank events from 4 players all the way until we get into the 500 plus range. I mean, we don't really get those on Limitless, but I would go basically as high as an event would go. There's thresholds for first, second, top 4, top 8, top 16, top 32, and there's kickers depending on if those kind of certain player thresholds are met. So this deck had quite a few placements, just not as much as it usually does. And that's really where I feel like this deck is kind of shifting out of the metagame. See, Skyscraper is all about kind of blocking your opponent's Pokemon with special energies. I think a lot of decks are playing Path to the Peak, and a lot of decks are actually like, this deck spiked up, players tried to counter this deck or build their decks differently, this deck goes down. Like Decidueye, I think there's got to be some kind of equilibrium or some kind of spike in play for Duraludon, which will then cause it to decline, which will then cause it to spike up again. Now, I'm not sure if we're going to see another spike of Duraludon VMAX, or that it's going to spike a large event, but I think with the fact that it's going down, players might not play as many Path to the Peaks to get through Skyscraper's ability. Players may not play as many basic energies in their deck to try to beat Duraludon. I think players might be a little bit, they might be less cautious of this deck is what I'm trying to say. So if Duraludon catches those decks slipping and they see Mew with 2 energies, or 2 basic energies, or they see Gengar cut down the paths from 4 to 3 to 2, then Duraludon's going to spike up because it just gets those freebie matchups right back. So if you are a Duraludon player, look for the proper time to strike. Again, I'm not sure if it's going to necessarily be before Fusion Strike is over. I'm not sure if this deck is going to be successful during our Brilliant Stars. I think this deck might gain Arceus V-Star, and I still think it needs a lot of testing. But what I'm saying is, this current build of Duraludon VMAX does have the opportunity to spike up a little bit. We still have a few weeks left of this metagame. Maybe it will have another chance in the future. Sparking into number 7, and previously jumping up from number 12, so a huge 5-spot leap. Victini VMAX, just 10 CP above Duraludon, so doing slightly better than it. This deck's all about using max victory, has some disruption cards, and it's kind of just like an interesting deck because it only plays the 4 Victini VMAX and the 4 Victini, 4 basics, 4 evolutions. A little bit of a weird deck, but it's the brainchild of Lee Bowie, and I do think that it's one of those things where the deck's pretty cool. Lee themselves were a great reason this week why the deck saw so much success. They made top 8 at the late night series, number 25. And that really boosted this deck kind of up there. We also saw a few other players spike it, so I think there's a huge correlation between decks seeing success at the late night series and trickling throughout the week, as long as those decks are like somewhat decent. I mean, in order for you to make it through 14 Swiss rounds into a top 16, of course your deck has to be somewhat decent, right? So I think players kind of look at that, they're like, oh, Victini is good again, Lee just did so well with it, let's play it. I think that's really what caused kind of a little bit of some action, rolling down the hill action for Victini to kind of see some play. Do I think Victini is going to see more success? I mean, with Leafeon V-Star, kind of people dabbling around with that, ZACIAN, Duraludon, and a few other decks, this build looks pretty good against the field. I do think that this deck does randomly struggle against some decks, such as Gengar, or even like Mew. Mew can just go ahead and Melodious Echo turn 1 with only 1 basic. Like, it's a little fragile for my liking, but I do respect, and I think that this deck can represent well throughout the rest of the week. I do have reference videos. I do want to let people know that, like, there is a pinned comment in the comment section with all the decks. I typed them all out, and you can kind of get them with reference videos. You can plug and play those in the PTCGO. If you want to know any more about those decks, I do offer personal coaching on Metafy, metafy.gg/ZachLesage. That's also in the description. So if you want to pick up a coaching session within real life events, or if you feel like you're kind of stuck for some online events, I can personally and confidentially help you when it comes to growing as a player. Just hit me up. If you sign with the reference code, you can always DM me if you have any questions. It's one of those things where I'd love to see you help out. If you are looking for the cards for any of these decks, you can go to ptcgostore.com, plug in code ZLesage5. Again, that link is in the description. You can save 5% on your next order of codes. All of those things really help me as a content creator. Word up, we got Zacian Brave Blading all the way to number 6. I know that's somewhere out in the world. Epo and Josh are both smiling because this is the deck that they pretty much only play, or it's one of the decks that they mainly play, I guess I should say that, because I know Epo likes to play single strike and some other decks anyways. That being said, Zacian V is all about using Intrepid Sword, ripping those energies from the top, and then you have Brave Blade, so you could do 230 and maybe Boss's Orders up one of your opponent's Pokemon V. Zamazenta V is also good against Pokemon VMAX. It's one of those things where VMAX Pokemon sometimes just don't have an answer. Their Pokemon V are not strong enough against Zamazenta V. That can cause their decks to kind of crash and burn against this particular archetype. I'm not necessarily a fan of this deck. I do want to put that out there. It's a deck that I think is fine. It might be the most consistent deck, but I don't necessarily feel like it's kind of like Glass Cannon Mew in a lot of ways, where there's a select few players that prefer this more based off their general play style. I'm not necessarily as big of a fan of it because I think that Mew offers me a little bit more. So I find this deck a little bit too basic for my liking, but if you are new to the game, or if you're looking to kind of build a cheaper tier 1.52 deck, it is one of those things where this deck is definitely that. You could ball out on a budget with this deck. You definitely can win some tournaments because Josh and Epo have proven that. I just think in terms of the absolute upper echelon of Pokemon playing, it's probably not going to be as successful as Mew or Jolteon or any of the other decks that are consistently seeing success. But that's not to say that this deck is not successful and that it's not really good. They also added Sir Chester Bath this past week. Sir Chester Bath kind of making it a Luke Metal 2.0 as they've called it, or anything along those lines. I think that it's just kind of more of a generic stadium that helps out against decks that are playing 3 to 4 Path to the Peak, that are trying to get around Dauntless Shield or shutting off Intrepid Sword. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Sir Chester Bath. I think it can come up in some clutch situations, but I'm not entirely sure. This deck did slip a couple spots, so I think it's really one of those things where I'm showing this list. I'd actually rather prefer Hammers. I think Hammers make the deck a little bit more relevant, but if you are kind of trying to make this deck relevant, you gotta often understand, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? Mew VMAX is kind of the exact same concept, just a little bit more vicious. However, if you are a Zacian fan, or if you're trying to ball out on a budget, this deck is solid for you 100%. Single striking it up to number 5, and jumping up from number 7 last week is Single Strike Urshifu VMAX. This deck's all about using Single Strike Roar. You can power up your Umbreons or your Single Strike Urshifus. Some lists play Morpeko. I don't necessarily think Morpeko is too great because Mew's been playing a lot of Oricorio lately, but this deck you can kind of pick and choose the type advantage you want to gain against your opponent and have Houndoom to power it up. So kind of what I was talking about when we were talking about the Rapid Strike, Urshifu, Galarian Moltres deck, I do think that this is the type of deck that is a better fighting and dark deck because you can kind of power it up. It's more thematic and you're not necessarily trying to play a Rapid Strike Pokemon with just a random dark type Pokemon that's strong and then tying it together with like an Inteleon engine. This deck has the thematic draw of Tower of Darkness, can power up your Pokemon that are all single strike Pokemon. You can just see that like there's more synergy and there's more of a general single strike theme going on here. This deck really spiked up because I think players saw Gengar seeing success, so they're like, let's counter it with being a fighting type Pokemon with single strike Urshifu V. And of course, Umbreon can do pretty good against Mew, and the single strike can do pretty good against Jolteon as well. So you have a pretty good stranglehold, or so you would think, against the top 3 decks. Well, I'm going to tell you otherwise, and I think that this deck is kind of more of a myth at this point than actually proven, because everything else about the list proves itself week after week after week, because numbers do not lie, and especially if they're accurate, because I hand calculate all of these results. I'm not trying to say that there's no inaccuracies or that there's anything else like that, but I have a system that I use to kind of calculate every single result on Limitless. So there's a reason why the decks that are seeing success continuously see success, and I often share that with the community every single Monday. That being said, often this deck gets compared to Gengar because Gengar is a single strike deck. Gengar is better in every single way than this deck. There's no telling me otherwise. Maybe this deck has a slightly better Rapid Strike matchup, but this deck still loses to Rapid Strike in my opinion. So Gengar has a better damage output, just the Gengar V, because you got to think about it. When you're trying to play against an unfavorable matchup or a deck that has weakness, of course you're not going to evolve into a Gengar VMAX, or at least I would hope people would understand that. You want to attack with 2 prize card Pokemon. That's why I just say you could attack with Umbreon or Single Strike Urshifu, not the VMAX counterparts. Those are only necessary, like Single Strike Urshifu VMAX is only playable against Pokemon that you need to knock out in one hit. VMAX Pokemon with a lot of HP, or maybe you need to go through a Duraludon VMAX or a Zamazenta V. Umbreon VMAX is really only to give yourself extra HP if you think you could kind of tank a hit the next turn. Otherwise, you're attacking with 2 prize card Pokemon. If you're attacking with 2 prize card Pokemon, Gengar V outclasses these Pokemon. And if you attack first and your deck requires less different energies and it's more kind of streamlined than this deck, of course it's going to be a better deck. More damage, quicker, less energies. These are all words that you could just be like, oh, that's better, right? So it's one of those things where I think Single Strike Urshifu VMAX is just outclassed by another single strike deck. I also think that it also is just not as good against Mew as people might think it is, because Mew can just outspeed this deck doing turn 1 Melodious Echo, knocking things out, and even Jolteon can catch this deck slipping because this deck kind of turns into a little bit of a pile, as we like to say. Jolteon doesn't necessarily even have the worst matchup against this deck. I think this deck is more like neutral than anything else nowadays, but it's one of those things to watch out for. I know that it's a very controversial hot take, but I'm letting you know, out of all my experience playing Pokemon since 2005, that's wholeheartedly how I feel. I would not play this deck under any circumstance for any kind of events. I just think that it's there because people are literally playing it because they do not know elsewhere. Now, I don't want to be like it's a bad play by any means either. I just think there's significantly better plays to play, and I would definitely look into those. Sneaking up to number 4 and jumping up from number 5 last week is Sableye V Dark Box. I often struggle with the name of this deck, but the goal of this deck is to really sacrifice single prize card Pokemon, maybe doing some chip damage with severe poison or slowing down your opponent with neutralizing gas, getting some damage on board with Assault Gate, mid-game after your opponents draw some prize cards, or you've placed enough damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon, you can go ahead and rip into your opponent with Fiery Wrath with the Galarian Moltres, drop that down from your hand, Or you might want to use Crazy Claws with a Raihan to attack with Sableye V for a lot of damage. Cast Form, I know a lot of people are going to ask, Cast Form is free retreat, just so you can kind of pivot in between Assault Gate or choose between your single prize card or any kind of Pokemon to attack with. Yes, some lists play Tapu Koko. I like this card because you can search it out with Level Ball. There's other Cast Forms that do have free retreat. I think that when it comes to weakness, when it comes to lower metal damage output, there's really nothing that's going to knock out the Cast Form comparatively to the other weaknesses, but that's just kind of me being a little bit niche and picky. That being said, I think this deck's great at doing a lot of things. It is a little bit inconsistent, so I think that that's kind of playing around with it. I'd probably pick another deck, like I don't want to be like Gengar, but I would probably pick a Gengar when it comes to choosing a dark deck. I think that one's seeing a little bit more success when it comes down to it. However, if you are into more of a single prize card, very high skill deck, this is definitely it. I think this deck requires a lot of skill to play, and it is one of those things where this deck is just solid. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's just great. It does well against a lot of decks as long as you set up. Hopping in to number 3, and also number 3 last week, Gengar VMAX. Now, I've talked about this throughout the video, and you can tell that I probably like Gengar VMAX by now. I've taken a deep breath over the past, looking over the Sableye V deck. I want to apologize to anyone who likes the single strike deck. Maybe I was a little bit harsh. I honestly almost re-recorded it, but I figured, let's just be honest. I'm not a huge fan of single strike when compared to this deck. I think that's what I'd like to change my last thing about single strike saying. That's not to say single strike is not a valid deck. I just think that there's a better single strike deck, and I think that's what I tried to put off. Maybe I was a little too harsh, so if I offended any single strike players, by all means. I just really think that this deck is better in terms of damage output and energy cost, and requiring less moving pieces. And of course, you still have that dark fighting vibe, so that you could be fighting type against other Gengar decks that might evolve into a Gengar VMAX, or you might be able to be a fighting type against a Jolteon VMAX deck that is quite popular. I mean, we already have Gengar VMAX up here. If you think that Jolteon and Mew are not in the top 2, unfortunately, you might be wrong. We'll have to figure out exactly how that goes out. Now, one thing that I want to dabble with this deck is cutting down the Path to the Peaks. I'm not necessarily going to do that right now because I think Path to the Peak is still very strong in a lot of niche scenarios, and sometimes you drop a Path turn 1 and win the game because your opponent cannot get out of Path. And I know a lot of people are like, why would you play Crobat and Path? Well, you could play Crobat before Path, or bump it with your Tower of Darkness. This is one of those rare decks that plays more than 4 stadiums. It plays 6 stadiums, 4 Path, 2 Towers, so it does end up working there. A lot of people also ask me about the third urn. This deck requires less energies than single strike, and sometimes decks will run with whatever you have. You know what I'm saying? Like, I treat sometimes playing decks as I am broke going to the grocery store, struggling college student kind of vibes. So when it comes to Urn of Vitality, I know I have enough to scrape by. Some games are going to be close, but I still win a majority of those games. Approximately off the top of my head, I have about a 65% win rate with Gengar. I think a lot of other players have been seeing a lot of similar success with it lately, and that's the reason why it shot up. Last week, I think it was around 500 CP. It's now at 700 CP. It is closing in the gap to the number 2 deck, so if you haven't played this deck, I highly recommend it. I think this is by all means the best dark deck and the best fighting deck, even with the one fighting card that we have in our format, because it's proven itself over the past few weeks. I think now that the build has kind of been found out, I think this is definitely the type of deck that is going to see a lot more success. And in our Brilliant Stars format, this deck is only going to get better with Arceus V-Star and or Choice Belts. Zapping its way into number 2, and also number 2 since the past 2-3 months, is Jolteon VMAX. Jolteon VMAX is about Max Thunder Rumble, 100 to the active, 100 to the bench, and you get that 100 damage on the bench because they have to have damage on them. You can get that damage with Zigzagoon or Quick Shooting Inteleon, maybe even Jolteon V's first attack and or Scoop Up Net. So there's ways to make that happen. Using Path to the Peak, Marnie, and some other disruptive cards allows you to really kind of make your opponent brick in a lot of cases. Sometimes Jolteon VMAX, as we said before in this video, Path to the Peak can just stick, and Jolteon VMAX can really take advantage of that by bossing up one of your opponent's Pokemon that has a larger retreat cost and then really just going Max Thunder Rumble strategically to draw multiple prize cards. So the way that I like to look at it, any deck that splits damage up into multiple pieces is instantly more high skilled, because you're playing, when you're going Gengar VMAX, GMAX Swallow Up, your attack. This deck requires you to split that attack and then choose another Pokemon, because when you're just attacking one Pokemon, you only have one choice. So it's one of those things where if you're attacking multiple Pokemon at once, or if you're placing damage counters, the deck is instantly going to be more skill-based. And I think that that's where Jolteon is. So if you know what you're doing with this deck, I think this deck is really good. I've seen so much success with this Escape Rope that I've been inspired by my fellow Shuffle Squad teammate Lindsay that I've added it into this deck. It's one of those things where I don't necessarily like the inclusion of Palpad in their build, but it's one of those things where I think the Escape Rope is absolutely amazing, and I found myself in many situations abusing that card to win games, giving me that extra kind of boost of a third boss / switch if necessary. So this is the list that I've been absolutely loving. If I had the opportunity, I would play this deck in a tournament. I have not had a lot of time for tournaments because I've been too busy running them and creating content right now, but maybe this week I'll find myself playing Jolteon in a tournament or two. We'll have to see how it goes. I think this is really just a solid build. By all means, if you haven't already guessed the number one spot, let me know in the comments, but we're going to be jumping into that right now. Boom! Here you have it at number one the week before. Same thing as Jolteon for the past 2-3 months. Number one spot, 1320 CP. By all means, the best deck in the format, Mew VMAX. Mew VMAX excels because it has the opportunity to copy whatever you really want. Other decks do not have the ability of choice of that much when it comes to their attacks. And you might be like, yo, does it really matter? Well, just the ability to go Psychic Leap, put Mew back in the deck in a weird situation or a tough situation, huge. Being able to do the difference between Max Miracle to go through anything. You're not just going to run into a Decidueye deck and lose. You're not just going to run into a Zamazenta deck and lose. You're not just going to run into a Duraludon deck and lose. You have a fair fighting chance with Mew VMAX. Other decks do not have that fair fighting chance. Gengar VMAX, again, here's Zach going off with Gengar VMAX, literally needs to play 4 Path to the Peaks just to get through a Duraludon matchup. Think about it with Mew VMAX. You do not need that. So keep that in mind as you're playing it, that Mew VMAX has so much built in, it's just superior to most other decks. Regardless of matchups, this deck is superior to every other deck on the entire top 20 list, just in formats. You have your built-in draw support that's absolutely broken with Cross Fusion System, or Cross Fusion Strike System? Fusion Strike System. I always get all the things all mixed up. You're drawing a bunch of cards with Genesect. You could turn one attack with Meloetta. Of course, you could reduce damage with Oricorio, which is helpful against the Sableye V Dark Box matchup and the Jolteon matchup. I'm sure you'll find some other matchups where it's good. Bring up whatever you want, accelerate energies. I mean, this deck has it all. This is the build that I was able to win the Master Ball 100-ish player tournament about a week ago. I totally recommend playing this build. This build's seen a lot of success for me and my testing group and my friends and everyone else involved. I think this is just kind of a solid build against the entire metagame. There are, like, maybe I would add another Rotom Phone. Maybe you can cut the third Psychic now with Duraludon, but in kind of an unknown metagame or kind of any of these larger events, or kind of any of the events nowadays, you could run into any of the top 20 decks. I really like this build because it handles most things well. So I think Mew VMAX, if you haven't already invested in it, by all means invest in it. It's worthwhile, and it gets only better with Brilliant Stars, getting Choice Belt, Roseanne's backup, double Turbo Energy. I'm sure there's a few Ultra Ball. I'm sure there's a few other changes that we might be able to see with the list. So if you haven't picked up Mew VMAX now, it gets even better next sets. It's definitely the time to pick it up. And there you have it, peeps. That's what we got going on for our best decks in formats. Again, stay tuned for the 11 through 20 tomorrow and a full week of Pokemon TCG content. We do daily uploads here. As always, giving it a like is the freest way to support my content. That's just, you don't have to do anything else. It's totally free, and it does help signal boost to other Pokemon fans. Subscribing is also huge, and just like getting some word of mouth out there. If you could tell one person about this video that hasn't watched it, that might be another subscriber, getting us to 10k subs, meaning I could just do more content on YouTube. So all the help there would be absolutely amazing. Double check to make sure that you haven't already subbed. If you didn't, put your top 10 in the comments below. Let me know if you expected these top 10 decks. If there's any decks that you've been playing around with that you think should be on this list, let's spark a discussion. Let me know in the comments below. If you really want to help support me financially as a content creator, by all means, you can get a YouTube membership. You can get access to all my deck lists and some other good stuff. Become a Patreon supporter, same kind of deal. You can go to metafy.gg/ZachLesage. Those links are in the description, by the way. Get a coaching session with me if you want to grow with in real life play and all these online tournaments. I'm sure I could teach you something new about the game, and it's one of those things where I feel like my patience and expertise as a coach go hand in hand. I've been coaching for a while now, and I really hope that I can help some players kind of grow into the community a little bit more. Beyond that, you can go to PTCGO plug in code ZLesage5 to save 5% on your next order. By all means, I really appreciate everyone who supports it. Those are just some ways to help support, but I do want to let them know in case anyone is trying to do something, grow, anything else like that. That being said, we're gonna have a great week of content, so stay tuned. Catch up with all y'all later. Peace out. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. It means the world to me. And my goal with this channel is to spread my love of the game and knowledge with our entire Pokemon TCG community. If you haven't already, help signal boost this video to other Pokemon TCG fans by liking it, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the channel. Hopefully we reach our goals really soon. Check out this recommended video and have yourself a great day. Thanks.